Well, good Friday morning. I hope it's a lot warmer where you are than where we are, because right now we are freezing our butts off on this Friday morning. And it's the second edition of the Parleh Sports Betting Show with me, Jorey Middlestadt, and the other bald guy, I'm going to keep saying that, is Harley Redlick. We're going to be with you each and every week on Canada's sports betting network, otherwise known as the Parleh. And we really want to hear from you. Yes, we've only done one. This is number 2, but we want your feedback, your questions, your comments. You can pan our picks, whatever it is. You can send us your picks. Reach out to us. It's questions@theparleh.com on email. You can hit us both up on Twitter @JoreyMiddle, @SharpEdgePicks, @theparleh. And whenever you're using social media, use the hashtag ParlehSBS. Good day, Harley. How are you?
I'm also frigid, Jorey.
Thank God for heat.
Yeah, heat is good.
All right, let's tell everybody what's going to happen on the program today. We are going to talk about, as we are each and every week, probably forever, but certainly in the first 8, 10, 12 episodes of the program, we're going to introduce betting concepts and terminology, and we're going to try and cover 2 or 3 each week. Now, I know if you listened in or watched last week, we plugged that we were going to do parlays this week, but we're calling an audible in honor of the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, Harley. And we're going to talk about Moneyline bets and proposition bets. And one of the reasons we're going to talk about proposition bets is with the Super Bowl approaching, which is the king of prop bets, and going back as short as 10 years ago was kind of the only place or only event they really offered a long sheet of proposition bets. Now it's a totally different story. So we'll explain the money line and proposition bets this show. We'll talk about parlays next week, as well as how to manage your money, right? And that's something that's near and dear to your heart.
Bankroll management is essential. Player props are a ton of fun. I'm glad you mentioned the Super Bowl. Let's date ourselves, Jorey. I don't know how many of our listeners were around in betting in 1985. Everybody remembers the 85 Bears, the Super Bowl shuffle, and the defense. But of course, the bet that got the sports books crushed was Will, the fat, big, huge lineman, defensive player, William the Refrigerator Perry, score a touchdown. It opened at 50-1, closed at 4-1. That's how much betting action there was. The Fridge did score a touchdown in the Super Bowl, as we all know, even though the Bears scored like 5-6 touchdowns. They didn't let Walter Sweetness Payton score a touchdown in his only Super Bowl appearance. But one of the few times that the bettors absolutely ravaged the books, and as guys who are always cheering for the bettors to do well, that was a happy memory. And yes, we will talk about player props later in the show. But for now, let's recap the week and talk about how well my NFL bets did.
Oh, you didn't even let me pump your tires. Like, settle down.
I'm going to let you pump it even more.
You didn't have to go out there on your own. I was ready to give you all the credit you deserve. And so for those who missed it and those who listened, first show, what better than having the guy whose picks you should be paying attention to a lot more than mine, with certain exceptions, but not many. Harley was 2-0 last week. He gave you the under in the Cincinnati Bengals, Las Vegas Raiders game, the first of not so super wild card weekend, which we'll talk about in a sec. And he gave you the Niners to beat my Dallas Cowboys. Well, cover the spread. I don't know if you played the money line on that one, but we haven't explained money line to all our listeners yet. So just
we'll cover it today.
Hold that thought.
Dominated.
And just in an overall sense, to recap, not so super wild card weekend, because most of the 4 of the 6 games were blowouts essentially and not very exciting. Funny enough, the 2 that were the ones that you played, but the favorites were 5-1, and the unders were 4-2. And just for context, because there's not a big sample size, this is only the second year of the current playoff format. Remember, they added the 7th playoff team in each conference last year, and it was a complete reversal of last year. The Dogs were 5-1 last year, wild card weekend, and the overs were 4-2. So Any quick thoughts on what you liked, didn't like, other than the fact that you won both your bets?
Yeah. So first we'll talk about Super Wildcard Weekend, and then I'll get into dissecting my bets and why that's important. And then we can finish off with the referees. So a lot of people were critical of Super Wildcard Weekend. The 7 seeds looked flat. Like you said, last year they looked good. That's largely noise, and I encourage people to ignore it. When you hear a team is 4-2 against the spread on 6 Monday night football games, I mean, that sometimes dates back 5 years.
Yeah.
It's like March Madness. There's years where the 13s and 14s are upsetting and it's a great tournament. And there's years where the favorites keep crushing and you're like, what's the point of the first couple of rounds? It's noise, it's volatility, it's the ups and downs. The media has to write and create a narrative. Shock jocks have to talk for hours, but at the end of the day, I think that's just noise. Looking at my bets, yes, I went 2-0, but there's lessons to be learned by everything. I got very lucky in my first game where I bet under 48.5 in Bengals Raiders. They looked horrid. There was 33 points scored at the half, 0 touchdowns in the second half for me to squeak in. It's an important lesson for our listeners, especially the ones that want to take this seriously. Evaluate your bets afterwards. In hindsight, the bet wasn't great. I was lucky to win. The bet that was great was my 49ers, who completely dominated Dallas. Dak, forget about that stupid play call late in the game. They were lucky to be in it. San Francisco ran down their throats. Dallas looked mediocre at best. Jerry Jones looked like he had food poisoning when they talked to him after the game. He was so white and pale. So that bet I will take full credit for. And
let me jump in because, as I said last week, I'm a Cowboy fan, and I don't want to belabor this point because we have lots to do today. Mm-hmm. I would agree with you that San Fran dominated the first half, but the second half was a totally different story. In fact, if you look back, the Niners only scored 1 touchdown, and it came on one play, a Deebo Samuel 26-yard run off a Dallas turnover. So they got the ball at the Dallas 26-yard line. Otherwise, the Dallas defense played great in the second half, and the offensive showing by the Cowboys was abysmal, as was the coaching, because the Cowboys were not prepared to play this game. 14 penalties, 6 pre-snap penalties. I could sit here for half an hour and dissect what went wrong in that game and for a lot of the season with a 12-win Cowboy team, but we're going to move on. But kudos to you. As they say, they don't say how, they say how many. You got the under. Yes, it was a sweat. So that game, there was no real handicapping winner, if you will, right? Because it came down to literally the last play of the game. The spread, the total, everything was on the line in that Cincinnati and the Raider game. All right. Again, I could go on and on about last weekend, in particular the Cowboys, but let's move forward. All right, I want to talk about, you wanted to quickly talk about the refs, and probably the most egregious call of the weekend was in the Cincinnati Raider game late in the first half, the inadvertent whistle. That touchdown should not have counted. They should have had to replay the down, but we saw, we could complain about refereeing in all the sports, but the NFL, with so many people watching, it's a little bit embarrassing, isn't it, at times?
I thought it was embarrassing. I mean, that's just factually getting a rule wrong. You hear a whistle before the touchdown. The rules clearly state that the down gets replayed. And to say it's not reviewable is just stupid. What's the point of having replay if we can all clearly hear a whistle on replay and you don't overturn it?
It's a scoring play. It's a scoring play, so it should have been reviewed.
They're sloppy. It's a reviewable, but that part of the rule is not reviewable. Why on earth they wouldn't have that part of the play be reviewable is just stupidity on the NFL. That's one of those they're going to change in the offseason, which is always the admission of guilt. The penalty that doesn't get talked about enough, and maybe I'm bitter because I gave the Eagles as a bet on the parlay video, and the Eagles got dominated. I'm not suggesting they deserve to cover. But on Tom Brady's first drive, he had a 3rd and long that went incomplete, and they called out roughing the passer penalty that even Troy Aikman, as a former quarterback, described as horseshit. It was low, not too low. He hit the thigh. He hit the perfect spot at the right time. But to Tom Brady, I mean, listen, the truth is they should play touch football when it comes to Tom because you can't tackle him or you get called for a penalty. And the Bucks scored on that drive. They had the momentum, etc. I mean, they deserve to win that game, and I'm not complaining so much as an Eagles better, but lose the right way, not because a bad penalty was called on the first drive.
But yeah, Philly was a bit of a fraud. The Steelers, both 7 seeds, they were not ready for prime time, and that showed big time. Yes, the Eagles made it almost interesting, but that's mainly because the Bucks took their foot off the gas. Let's be honest, they were up 31-0, and Philly had no answer for the Buck offense when the game was in doubt. Yeah, 0. Absolutely. All right, betting concept number 1 for today, the money line. Last week we talked about point spread. The money line is a different animal and a different way to bet. So why don't you explain for our audience, what is a money line bet?
So money line bet is the closest you have to being in it with the teams. You're just betting who will win. So there's no, Kansas City let up late against Pittsburgh, or so you don't cover the spread. You're just betting who will win the game. So to make life simple, if one team is a little to better than the other team, maybe you'd be a 2-1 favorite, and then you get 2-1 on the dog. So if a game in a hypothetical universe was played 99 times, the favorite would win 66 times and the underdog would win 33 times. You'd have to get 2 times your money back, or 2-1 odds plus your investment. So 3 times your money on the dog. And you'd lay $2 to win $1 on the favorite. Now, because of juice, they add in cents. So the way this would be written is you'd risk $2.20 to win 100 on the favorite, and you get 180 profit for each 100 risked on the dog. And then the money line gets a lot bigger when you got a big favorite or a big dog. Let's use the example of the Niners-Packers game. Clearly, Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay are better than Jimmy if he even plays in the Niners, especially at home, coming off a bye week. So Green Bay was minus 250 in the game, and the Niners are 210. Again, Green Bay is more than a 2-1 favorite. When you net out VIG, they're going to win this game 70% of the time. So you have to risk $250 to win 100 of profit on Green Bay. And for every 100 you risk on the 49ers, you'd get back 310 or 210 in profits.
Right. So Green Bay opened as I look here at the lines, give me one sec, apologies. But so from a point spread standpoint, Green Bay opened as a 4.5 point favorite. They went all the way up to 6. They're now pretty much 5.5 across the board. And then when you look at the money line, as I scroll around here, right now, I would say the average is Green Bay is minus 240, and San Francisco is actually a little more variance, but around plus 190 or plus 200. Okay. So here's a very important question. If you like the Packers to win, would you lay the minus 250 to win, or 240 to win 100? Or is that just too much risk in a game where we know that San Fran can win this game? In other words, let me phrase it a different way. What is your threshold when playing money line favorites?
I hate betting money line favorites. To me,
I'm with you.
If you think the team is going to win handily, bet them to cover the 5-6 points. Yep. If you say, nah, I don't think they're going to win handily, then why are you risking $240 to win a lousy $100? If you don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to beat up on the 49ers, just don't make the bet. Make a pass. In fact, my favorite bets are betting small money line dogs in games where I think they're toss-ups and you get plus money. And 2 of my favorite bets this weekend are in that wheelhouse, both the Bills and the Rams.
All right. And I'll ask you for your picks in a moment. So what would the most you would lay on a money line favorite? Like, is there a line of demarcation for you?
In the NFL, I will never bet a money line favorite because except the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is the exception. We'll get into it closer to the Super Bowl because a lot of public money bets the underdog with the money line instead of the spread. So you get value betting the favorite on the money line versus the spread. The Super Bowl is the exception. In the NFL or college football or any time, the NBA, college basketball, anytime there's point spread, hockey's different. Anytime there's a big point spread available, if you like the favorite, you should think the favorite's going to beat up the underdog and lay the points. In hockey or baseball, those are the only exceptions where they don't have much of a puck line or a run line. And again, these are
not much of a point spread. Not much of a point spread.
Correct.
It's more of a
There's not much of a point spread in those sports. Right. If you like a small favorite and you want to lay, I would never lay ever anything more than minus 150 in professional sports. At the end of the day, minus 150 means you think your team's going to win 60% of the time. With the parity in most of the North American sports leagues, and obviously other leagues and amateur sports are an exception, I don't have as much confidence as many people do on the favorites. People are usually loaded up on the favorites. Aaron Rodgers isn't going to lose to Jimmy Garoppolo or whoever is going to end up starting for the 49ers or what's going to happen. So you're on the public with the favorites. I hate doing it in general, and stay away from bigger than minus 150. I even do that in the other sports.
All right, so let's talk about the divisional round. 4 games, my favorite weekend of the football season. My favorite Sunday's next weekend, Championship Sunday, but my favorite weekend is a divisional round. Why? You generally have the 8 best teams, and if you don't, usually there's a real Cinderella type story developing where a big underdog has won outright in the wild card weekend. This weekend, no real Cinderella stories. I don't think the 49ers qualify. So of the 4 games, is there one that you like on the money line or 2? I think you alluded to 2 before.
Yeah, to me, there's 5 teams that are all in the upper echelon fighting for the Super Bowl, and that's Green Bay and the 4 teams that are playing 2 phenomenal matchups this weekend, both games on Sunday.
Both Sunday games, the Rams at the Bucks and the Bills at the Chiefs.
Yeah, and I like the 2 dogs on the money line. The Bills are plus 110 and the Rams are plus 125. Again, that means 110 of profit for $100 wagered on the Bills, so you get back 210, and 125 of profit for 100 wagered on the Rams. Again, since you get the plus money, if you split, you turn a profit. The reason I like these picks is I don't think home field is worth what it once was in the NFL with replay. I think these are amazing matchups of super close teams. All 4 of them, along with Green Bay, are Super Bowl contenders. All 4 of them looked amazing last week. All 4 of them have strong quarterbacks. I actually think Josh Allen's at a point in his career where he's on par with Patrick Mahomes, and the Bills' D average giving up 4 points less than the Chiefs' D per game this season, so the Bills' D is probably better. Brady might be the GOAT and marginally better than the Rams quarterback, but the Rams have stud receivers, by far the 2 best defensive players in Donald and Ramsey, and I think they're a great team. You add it all up, I think both games are going to be amazing. You split, you make a profit, and I'm all over both the Rams and the Bills on the money line, and I'm really looking forward to the Sunday games.
And I think the spreads and the way the money has been distributed so far on these games suggests that these are coin flip games. Mm-hmm. So in a coin flip game, why not take the money line underdog? Mm-hmm. To your point, you split them, you still end up a winner.
Yep.
Right? That's the theory. Okay.
That's the exact theory. Well said.
So you said 5 teams could win it. Interestingly, one of those teams that you did not mention is the number 1 seed in the AFC, the Tennessee Titans. That's the first game, Saturday at 4:30 Eastern. They're the number 1 seed. They're coming off a bye. They're getting the king back, Derrick Henry. Now, he's been out for half the season, so we don't know how much time he's going to see, how effective he will be. Do you have a thought on that game?
I do. I think the Titans, I don't want to say they're a fraud, but remember how the Eagles and Cowboys sucked last week, Jorey?
Yes, I remember.
They came from a horrible division with the Redskins and the Giants that were atrocious. And the Titans won a horrendous division. The Jaguars and Texans could be the 2 worst teams in the NFL. So somebody has to win the game. Somebody has to come out of the division. The Titans' 12-5 record is inflated. They won 6 of their 12.
They did have some big wins. right? They took out the Chiefs. They took out the Bills. I mean, they had some big wins, especially early in the season when Henry was on the field.
And they also only won 6 of their 12 games by 3 points or less, and they're a 3.5-point favorite. We talked about the value of the 3 last week. I can't emphasize that number enough. When you get the Bengals plus 3.5, 8% of games the Titans are going to win by 3, and another 4 or 5% they're going to win by 1 or 2 points. I don't think anybody, including Ryan Tannehill's mother, would argue he's a better quarterback than Joe Burrow. The NFL is a pass-happy league, and Joe Burrow is a stud quarterback. Getting the better quarterback and 3.5 points in the NFL, that's a rare combo against a team that's not a fraud but won a weak division. You add it all up, and the Bengals plus 3.5. I mean, I love Henry. Who knows what he's going to be like after 8 weeks, although I think he's a beast. I think Coach Vrabel has always got his team playing sharp. I have no doubt Tennessee will make it close, but I don't buy them plus 3.5. I think the Bengals are the bets.
All right. I actually would lean the other way on that game. I think the Titans are being a little bit undervalued. And again, the Henry factor is unknown. But the one thing that I do know, in the back half of the season, the Titans pass rush was excellent. And that had been their Achilles heel the previous year in the first half of this season. It was they just didn't get to the quarterback. Joe Burrow was the most sacked quarterback in the league this year. The Bengals offensive line does not pass protect all that well. And so for them, they're going to have to do the quick, if they're going to throw the ball a lot, they got to go with the quick passing attack. The 5-7 step dropbacks are not going to work. It also, you talked last week about Joe Mixon, who's an excellent runner on the other side. That's going to be important for the Bengals. If they can get a bit of a run game going, slow down the pass rush of the Titans, that will be important. If Tennessee, though, runs the ball well, the one area where Ryan Tannehill is arguably the best quarterback in the league, and the numbers will back this up, he's certainly in the top grouping, is play action passing. And that's where the Titans do damage with A.J. Brown, and they finally have a healthy Julio Jones, although he didn't contribute a whole lot this year. But I'm not saying I love the Titans, but I'll lean a little bit that way. Sometimes you got to play devil's advocate as well. And if you listened to me last week, you didn't do very well other than the Bills. So you may want to listen to Harley here. Any over-under picks, which we introduced last week on any of the 4 divisional round games before we move on?
I didn't love anything this week. I'm going to make it a pass. Again, I encourage anybody watching or listening, when in doubt or you don't have a feel for the game, if you really want to get a bet in, bet the unders. They tend to be a little bit inflated, especially this time of year. So if you have an opportunity or you need to make a bet, the unders on these primetime games with everybody cheering for offense, especially after the performances that all these stud quarterbacks put on. I mean, Josh Allen looked phenomenal. Mahomes looked phenomenal. Who the hell is betting the under in that game? Again, the Rams and the Bucks, they both rolled over the competition. Everybody's betting the over. Everybody thinks there'll be a touchdown on every possession. So the under tends to be value. But I'm going to take a pass on that. What about you, Jorey? You like anything this weekend?
Like I said, I like the Titans a little bit. And I'm with you on the Rams. Initially, I thought I was leaning towards the Bills as well. My concern with the Bills is how do you, like, you cannot repeat what happened last week. I mean, it was historic, right? No punts, no turnovers. No. They scored a touchdown on every single possession. It's hard to back that up. And so I think that's a coin toss game. I think the Rams and the Bucks are a coin toss game. In fact, I think if Jimmy Garoppolo, who's not the world beater, but if he didn't have a bad thumb and a bad shoulder, right? He is going to play apparently as of today. And again, I don't think he's the reason they win, but San Fran, just look at the numbers. When he plays, they're just a much better team. So I don't have any solid pick on that one, but Titans, Rams would be the 2 that I would look at, and Rams on the money line. I agree with you there. There's one other thing we want to talk about with regard to the money line. It actually relates to the National Hockey League. and how COVID has had a crazy impact on some of the money lines, because most people don't bet the puck line, which again, we'll talk about when we get, once football's done, we'll spend a little more time on hockey. We'll do a deep dive into how to bet hockey specifically. But you wanted to talk about some crazy money line dogs that appeared this year in the NHL before we talk about the Canucks at the Panthers, which is the only Canadian team in action tonight.
So this year in the NHL, we've seen the two biggest underdogs in the history of the NHL. And this is largely COVID ravishing rosters and partially the NHL teams learning from the NBA on how to tank. For example, teams like Ottawa, Arizona. So Florida, who's awesome, who we'll get to in a minute against the Canucks, hosted Montreal last month in a game where Montreal was literally playing minor league AHL, OHL guys because of COVID ravishing. And Colorado was home to Arizona. Both of these games, the favorites won. Colorado was the biggest favorite in NHL history. You had to risk $600 to win $100 on Colorado. They ended up winning in a shootout, but imagine that, risking $600 to win $100 in a hockey game where, as we all know, a couple of pucks, a couple bounces. The Leafs lost a game in Arizona a couple weeks ago on a Wednesday night where they outshot Arizona 50-15. Be careful laying big money in the NHL.
All right. So we always want to cover the Canadian teams when they're in action. And again, if you're just joining us, we're doing this on Friday morning, and we will always remind you to check lines unless you've already made your play, but to check the lines as close as possible to game time, especially in the COVID era. There can also be last minute injury scratches. We've seen guys get hurt in the warm up and that kind of thing. So you actually have a play on the Florida Panthers, who are in Vancouver. So a late start tonight. And the Canucks, since the coaching change, have been a very good team. And they are coming off a long road trip, while the Panthers, I mean, they destroyed the Oilers last night, although that game was pretty close into the third period. But your thoughts on this one?
So Florida's a road favorite, not surprisingly. You got to lay minus 170 on them, and the Canucks are plus 150. Again, remember, plus 150 means you make 150 of profit for $100 risked, or you get back 250, which equates to winning 40% of the time is your break-even rate. The Panthers, as you mentioned, coming off a back-to-back, crushed Edmonton last night. They're clearly part of the elite of the NHL standings, while the Canucks are a middle-of-the-pack team, although they are hot. Be very careful with teams like the Panthers coming off the back-to-back. Bobrovsky played last night, their starting goalie. He likely won't start tonight. They haven't named a starter yet. After a big win, it's a tough spot for Florida. Getting the Canucks plus 150 at home is worth a shot. It's just a good spot for them. Florida coming off the back-to-back with a huge win on the road, having to travel from cold Edmonton to Vancouver. Remember, Canada's in lockdown compared to the U.S. I mean, if I'm these guys, I've had enough. I want to go south of the border where things are warm and open.
Yeah, playing in front of fans it's got to be so difficult to play in an empty arena. There's no question. Even half capacity is enough atmosphere. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, Florida plays in half capacity for all intents and purposes all the time. So
yeah, at one point though, they will wake up and realize that they have one of the best teams in the league and are an absolute Stanley Cup contender. All right.
I actually think what's more likely to happen is more and more people from Ontario move to Florida because they're sick of lockdowns and the frigid weather, and they adopt the Florida Panthers because they're better than the Leafs, and they start filling up the arena. But we'll see.
The other betting concept that we wanted to talk about today is the proposition bet. And I'm not talking about propositioning someone, if you know what I mean, but in a sports gambling vernacular, a proposition bet, most people call it a prop bet. And what it is it's a wager in sports betting that's not tied to the final score or an outcome of the game. So just give some general examples and then we'll talk more specifics, Harley.
So the most famous one we alluded to at the beginning of the show
was,
the Fridge score a touchdown in the Super Bowl? The most common ones you see are Will Aaron Rodgers complete more or less than 24 and a half passes against the 49ers? Will Tom Brady get any rushing yards? Will Derrick Henry score a touchdown? Those are the most common ones. It's very popular in the NBA. The NBA is a superstar league. So when you're watching games, more people are watching LeBron than the Lakers, or Greek Freak than they care about the Bucks. So will the Greek Freak score more or less than 27 and a half points? And the one thing I want, two things we need to talk about. One thing we need to warn our listeners about is that it's harder to make a line on prop bets. The markets aren't as deep. You better do your research, because the VIG is not minus 110 on each side. It's usually at least minus 115. So remember that 52.4% we talked about that you needed to win to break even? With props, it's at least 54%, if not higher. So guys, be careful. Make your favorite bets. If you just want to bet $5 on whether or not Siakam scores, I think the line for Siakam and Van Vliet tonight is, we'll get into that game in a minute, but I think it's 22 and a half. Sure, bet it. It's fun. But don't bet real money without a real edge or a perceived edge, because it's just a lot of juice in the prop bets. That's the first thing. Second thing, we're going to talk about parlays next week. We're going to talk about same game parlays and how certain bets have effects on certain other bets. And that's something you really got to be aware of when you're betting these player props. For example, if Siakam's scoring a lot of points, it's hard for Van Vliet to score a lot of points. So be careful with that.
Now, that usually will require a little more work, a little more research, right? If you're going to start looking at correlations, which is what you're referring to, right? Where one prop is correlated to another, or could impact another proposition, because there's not only player props, there's game props as well, right? In other words, the game within the game, team to score first in football is one example. It could be talking about the NBA, the Raptors-Wizards game, which we're going to talk about momentarily. It could be, you could bet on one team's total points for a quarter, for a half, for the whole game. And so when you're looking at playing proposition bets, as you said, the juice is a little bit higher, but sometimes you can find value because there's so many options that the bookmakers can't be as sharp, right? And we'll talk about that term as we move along, and it's your Twitter handle at Sharp Edge Picks, right? They can't be as on the ball on every single prop that they make. And so sometimes you can find value there if you spend time to do so, right?
I'm glad you mentioned spending time. Before I quit my job at the bank to do this, I spent 3 years at the bank, and I was efficient, and I spent 2-3 hours a day at the bank with an Excel spreadsheet and ESPN pouring over data, mostly when it came to teams and games, baseballs, over-unders, tracking things, figuring things out. I had to do it in an environment where I had a boss looking over my shoulder. So anybody listening to this right now that's got a cushy job that they can do from home because of COVID, I expect all of you to spend 2-3 hours of your work days while working, running spreadsheets in Excel, figuring things out for yourself, and get your work done a little more efficiently. But yes, it requires a lot of research and a lot of work.
All right. So the two things we've been talking about today are the money line and proposition bets or prop bets. So the Raptors are in action tonight. They're at Washington to take on the Wizards. They lost a tough one to Dallas, and they're in the midst of their last game a couple nights ago. They're in the midst of a long road trip. Do you have a money line play or prop plays on this one?
I don't have a play I love, but I do like to analyze games like this, especially because I love the Raptors and I love Toronto and I love sports. For starters, there's no sport that values being at home like the NBA, and rightfully so. Stern created that league where fans cheer like crazy and the refs almost get part of the show. They look like Leslie Nielsen from The Naked Gun. They're excited when the home team scores late. The way they call fouls and charges are emphatic in favor of the home team. I mean, this is everywhere but in Fordland, where we don't have fans. Everywhere else has 20,000 screaming fans in the NBA. The Raps and Wizards are both middle of the pack, 500 teams. They could face each other in the NBA's new fun gimmicky play in April. There's no material injuries in this game. No offense to Gary Trent Jr., but Siakam or Van Vliet are worth 1 to 2 points in the line. The Greek Freak is worth 6. Gary is worth nothing. Two equal teams in the NBA are expected to win at home about 60% of the time. That's how much home field is worth. Home court in the NBA. Home ice, baseball, even baseball, it's only 55%. And baseball's got a real advantage. You get to bat last. That shows you how valuable the NBA and the refs cheering and the fans and the incitement. Tonight, the Raptors are only plus 110 and the Wiz are minus 130. It means the Raptors are expected to win tonight's game 46% of the time. Remember, if they thought them and the Wiz were equal teams, they'd be at 40%. That 6% win rate is huge, huge. Think about it. Over an 80-game season, 6% is worth 4 or 5 wins in the standings. So the bookmakers are saying, we respect you, Raptors. We think you're a better team than the Wizards. So that speaks well for the Raptors long term. And I was happy to see that. Prop bets tonight.
Yes, prop bets on that game.
Prop bets. So the first thing that struck me as a little bit odd is Van Vliet and Siakam are both have over-unders of 22.5 points. That speaks to me volumes for how much respect they actually have for Van Vliet as a scorer, because I look at him predominantly as a helper.
Playmaker? As a playmaker.
I mean, think about
he's been putting up a lot of points of late.
I know he has, but think about how much better that means Van Vliet is than Siakam. Siakam is primarily a scorer who's expected to score 22 points tonight. Van Vliet's expected to score 22 points, plus control the ball, plus get a ton of assists. So, I mean, if Siakam's a max player, I mean, Van Vliet is what, like a super max? Or, I mean, we know the Raptors overpaid Siakam, but to me, the prop bets are what I'd be using if I was an agent negotiating terms of contracts. Look how much respect they have for Van Vliet in that player prop line.
But can that also be a function of certain matchup?
100%. If the Wizards have weak, and this goes back to the research, I didn't do the research required to analyze this game properly. I don't know who's going to be covering Van Vliet, and I don't know if the guards on the Wizards play offense only or if they got Kyle Lowry style guards that play proper defense. That's the research you got to be doing. In fact, you got to be doing research to figure out how it fits. For example, Van Vliet's an outside shooter. So if the guard play on the other side is blocking the interior but will let you take threes, Van Vliet's going to score a ton of points. That's the kind of research that is required if you want to get involved in serious prop playing.
Okay. Any prop bets in any of the divisional round NFL games this weekend? Or you didn't really spend much time because you were analyzing all the money lines?
I mean, as a general rule, I'm not a big prop player except for the same game parlays. I love the same game parlays, which we'll
I'm with you. I'm totally with you on that. They're a lot of fun. Great way, fun way to watch the game, in my opinion. And we haven't explained it, but we will next week when we talk about parlays. But it is a really fun way. Well, just quickly, right? You can string together a bunch of bets and you get longer odds. Certainly not the odds that would be in your favor, right, when you add it all up. But you can bet 2 or 3 different things within the game, like, Patrick Mahomes to throw over whatever the yardage number is, the passing yardage number. And then if you think that he's going to have a big game, well, you might want to look at Travis Kelce's numbers and Tyreek Hill's numbers, or you may think that third wide receiver is going to have a big game. You string them together and it's a kind of like a lottery ticket, but it's a fun way to watch the game. Would you agree?
It's a totally fun way to watch the game. If you can put it together, you got to be careful though. So for example, certain parlays are also negatively correlated. For example, if you're betting that Siakam and Van Vliet are going to score a lot of points, you got to be careful that you don't bet over a no-B rebounds. You don't get a lot of rebounds if your team is scoring a lot of points. So some things work together well. Some things work negatively. You got to be very careful. We'll get into more detail last week. If somebody said, I got to make a bet The one bet I would consider is betting under 278.5 passing yards for Josh Allen or under 281.5 passing yards for Patrick Mahomes. Again, they're just coming off of huge games. The yardage is inflated by a little bit. The right line is probably closer to 275, and it got pumped up. So you want to bet something. Yeah, again, who's cheering for under passing yards? What, every time a guy drops back to pass, you want the receiver to drop the ball? So the value's on the under. If you want to play around with those, go for it.
Very good. All right. We got to talk about some tennis. Unfortunately, on the women's side, as we talked about last week, we're talking about the Australian Open, of course. Bianca didn't make the draw. Rebecca Marino qualified. She went out in the first round, but so did Leylah Fernandez. And she was the 23 seed. If you recall, I said I didn't think there was good value in her, even at 40-1, because of her draw. Well, it turns out she lost to a qualifier from Australia. That qualifier, though, is still alive, Madison Inglis. So it didn't look like a good loss initially, but Inglis has kind of backed it up and played very well. Having said that, our Canadian boys are both alive. Denis Shapovalov with a big 4-set win last night, and Felix Auger-Aliassime off a crazy 4-set win the night before, all tie breaks. Both have had neither guy has had an easy road, and neither Dennis has now played 3 matches. None have been straight sets. They've been 4 and 5 sets. Felix has played 2, and he's gone 4 and 5 sets, or 5 and then 4. So we're happy to see them alive. Things get a little more difficult now, though, for Shapo in the 4th round. He's got the number 3 seed, and some people think the favorite with Joker not in the tournament, as we know. That'll happen tomorrow. Tonight, Felix is in action, and he's got an interesting match against Dan Evans. So I know you wanted to talk a little bit about what we discussed last week in terms of some value plays.
I mean, let's just start with talking about the odds for the Canadians. So Felix is pick'em, meaning 50-50. Again, you risk 110 to win 100 on each side against Daniel Evans in that round 3 matchup. So that looks to be a good matchup. Shap, he won round 3 in 4 sets. He's coming back after losing the tiebreaker in the first set. He won the 3 in a row, but now he's playing Zverev, and he's a big dog. He's plus 350. You get back 4.5 on your money. So basically, Shapovalov is just over 20% win rate in that match. It's a tough one for him. Again, those are the Canadian boys. In terms of a handicap.
I just want to go back to Felix for a sec. So
sure.
Yeah, it's a pick 'em, right? As you said, you play either Evans or Felix. It's minus 110. Evans had a walkover in the 2nd round. So that has a little bit of an unknown to it because you don't know how he'll react having not played a 2nd round match. Felix is the higher ranked player. Keep that in mind. Yet it's a pick 'em match. The bookies are telling you something here, right?
All they're saying is Felix is the better player. Felix would be winning in normal circumstances 60% of the time, but Felix is coming off a really tough 4-set match in the heat and isn't rested, and his opponent is rested. So Felix has more talent, but if this match goes 5 sets, his tiredness plays in. So
he does have youth on his side, and he is extremely fit. I would take a look at Felix, but I'm a little hesitant. That line is a little bit curious. Now you were talking about Shapo and Zverev. I think Shapo's worth a look at plus 350, right? Is that what you're seeing?
I'm seeing Shapo at plus 350. Again, one thing we've talked about on this show, and we're going to talk about it again and again. If you like an underdog, sometimes it pays to wait. Zverev looks good. He's the favorite. A lot of people like parlaying multiple favorites to get back a payoff. And that minus 500 can go to minus 550, which means your plus 350 could go to plus 400. Winning $350, putting a hundo on Shap is good. Getting back $400 is that much better. This is something that I would wait and see. And 20 minutes before the match, if you can get Shapovalov at 4-1, I think he's worth a good shot.
And it is, you should always look at the line and then also look at where the players are seated in the tournament or ranked overall, because in many cases, the bookies will tell you something. And I just want to give a quick example of that. So last night, if you recall, one of my pre-tournament picks as a value play was as Victoria Azarenka, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So last night, she's the 24 seed. Okay. And she's looked good in the tournament and looked good in coming in to the event as well. She's playing the 15th seed last night, Elena Svitolina. So Svitolina is a higher ranked player by a fairly significant margin, almost 10 points, right? Almost 10 places in the rankings. So looking ahead, I'm like, I think I want to bet Azarenka because Svitolina has not looked sharp. She struggled in her first couple matches against nobodies pretty much. And so I go and look at the line. Azarenka is a minus 275 favorite.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't bet it because, she tweaks her ankle during the match, right? That's a lot to lay, right? Lay $275 to only win 100 in profit. I didn't play it. It turned out I was right. Azarenka blew her off the court. But again, going back to how much you'll lay on a money line favorite, would you have made that play? Given I was very certain that she was going to win the match, but I didn't want to lay that much juice. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Again, I'm just not a big fan of laying big money on favorites. And there are cases where it's probably warranted. I mean, every quote unquote professional out there loves to talk about when Mayweather crushed McGregor in that mock boxing match. And if you laid 5-1, you knew he was going to win. Those opportunities are few and far between. Generally speaking, the values on the dog. I wrote an article a few years ago that was called Dog or Pass, Under or Pass. Basically, if you want to make your life simpler, never bet the favorite. If your lean is towards the favorite, just make it a pass. And if they win, they win.
Do we want to take a quick look at the updated future odds on the Australian Open?
So we can take a quick look. We got both Canadians at 50-1 right now. Felix and Shap. Again, Shap is one round further, but he's got a killer fourth round matchup against Zverev. Medvedev is the favorite, plus 120, followed, like I said, by Zverev and Nadal coming on strong. On the women's side, Barty plus 137 is a big favorite, followed by Halep, Swiatek, Badosa, and your Azarenka is 12-1 in live. Do you have any picks, Jorey? Any updates on how your picks are doing besides your Azarenka?
Well, it's funny. Two of my longer shot picks didn't even make the field. Casper Ruud, who got injured in practice on the Saturday before the tournament started on Monday, he had to pull out. And Ons Jabeur on the women's side, who I liked at 40-1 as a long shot, she hurt her back in practice on Saturday. We recorded on Friday. So I hope you didn't, well, you would have got your money back because they never actually took the court. I'm still looking at Yannick Sinner. He was 20-1 last week. He's still at 16-1, and the draws opened up a little bit for him. So I think there's still some really good value on Sinner. Azarenka, as you mentioned, she was at 33-1. Her odds have come down, but I think she's still worth a look. And on the men's side, the other pick I might consider is maybe Rublev, Andrei Rublev, the Russian, the 5 seed. He's the other guy that might be worth a look. On the women's side, I will say this about the women's side. Naomi Osaka is out. She lost last night in a third set tiebreak to Anna Anisimova. A young American who's a very talented player who's had a really up and down career. And so tomorrow, Barty is going to play Anisimova, and Anisimova is a plus 333 underdog. I like that. I think there's good value in Anisimova. She can beat anybody, and a little concerned about what it took to take out Osaka, but at more than a 3-1 underdog, I think it's definitely worth at least a look. I'm not saying it's a hard and fast play, but I would consider it.
One thing I think we need to point out to all the listeners and viewers, you had mentioned that if your player doesn't play because of injury or start or qualify for the tennis tournaments, a lot of sports books will take your money. That's how futures bets work. One of the reasons I like betting anybody but Djokovic in this tournament was I don't think necessarily more than half the books refunded the Joker bets because he didn't play. That's part of the risk you take at a lot of the sports books.
Don't most of them have it in the fine print that they actually have to take the field, the court, or whatever?
Some do, but then again, look what happens to the books then for what happens. So then what do they do to the odds if you got anybody but Joker? You got inflated odds on Joker, and then they're at the mercy. Now, a lot of the sports books do the honorable thing, and they take the hit, but not all of them. It's a sports book specific thing.
Now, as we talked about last week on our first show, single game wagering is now legal in Canada, but right now the only place you can actually make single game wagers legally is with the provincial lotteries in Ontario with Proline Plus through OLG. Hopefully things are speeding up and we're getting closer to it seems to be going at a snail's pace right now, we should add, but hopefully we're getting closer. But I just wanted to point something out that caught my attention as more states open up in the US, right? Because it's done on a state-by-state basis as it's done here in Canada on a province-by-province basis. On January 8th, New York State opened mobile betting, right? Where so you can, from your computer and your phone, you can open an account and make wagers. In the first 10 days that they had mobile betting in New York, 1.2 million accounts were opened. And that's a staggering number. The population, just for context, of New York State is just shy of 20 million. We're just shy of 15 million in Ontario. And I don't know if it's a valid comparison, if it's apples to apples or not. Nope. I think it is in terms of what the interest will be in Ontario. But I don't think it'll quite get to the New York level, but that's just a crazy number, isn't it?
The number in New York was astonishing to get your head wrapped around. More than 5% of people signing up for an online account. I mean, just picture what it is in a stadium and how many people we're talking about. Ontario can never get to that number ever for two reasons. One, New York was a black market and there was no gray market Bet365 or other accounts. So plenty of people have accounts here anyways, and they got to switch over, and that's over time. Two, the way the rules are going to work in Ontario, they are not going to allow some of the crazy sign-up bonuses and gimmicks that caught everybody in New York's attention. So one of FanDuel or DraftKings lost $5 million yesterday on purpose, running a gimmick where you could bet the Knicks plus 184 points last night in their matchup, in their basketball game. Just a promotional thing to fund accounts for $100, $200. So if anybody ever wanted to sign up for an account, that's their chance. They get a free roll that they're not going to get again. And if and when Ontario runs, and there was a consulting report that came out this week. Granted, it was commissioned by Great Canadian, who runs brick and mortar casinos. So you got to take it with 2 grains of salt because they stand to lose while everybody else stands to gain with the online.
Right. Well, just give credit. That CBC News was who reported the story. We should give credit. Yes, go ahead.
Reported the story. Basically, Great Canadian Gaming, who runs brick and mortar physical casinos and stands to lose a lot with online. So you got to take this with 2 grains of salt. Teamed up with Unifor to talk about the fact that the Ontario government would lose billions of dollars and lots of jobs if they went online. Now, their big assumption in this, if you read the fine print, is that all the live casino bettors are just going to go online. We know that's likely not the case. The fear in Ontario now is that report will spook Ford. He'll delay his decision for a couple months till after the election, and now we're looking at Canada Day or something like that, or whoever comes into power then.
That would be such bullshit. What? I mean, we've waited so long to have single game wagering, and now they can't get their shit together to actually get people licensed and operating.
You're reliant on the Ontario government right now to run a business. I mean, is this a real conversation we're having? Like, I mean, of course there's going to be delays and it might never get done or get pushed down to the next guy and pass the buck along. That's the frustrating part about people that are dealing in this business. You're dealing with a real government bureaucracy that's highly regulating your business.
Yeah. And whenever you're dealing with government bureaucracy, things never go as quickly as they should or as you want. Before we leave you for this week, Harley, let's recap the picks that you made on the show. A couple with regard to the NFL Divisional Round, a slight thought on the Raptors and Wizards, and the Panthers at the Canucks. So just recap your picks for today.
So my pick for tonight in hockey are the Canucks plus 150. Again, that's a money line bet. Plus 150 means you get 150 of profit for every $100 you risk. I like the Canucks. I think it's a good spot for them against Florida. My money line bets in the NFL were the Bills and the Rams, getting a little bit plus money. Again, I like those games to both be close. Anybody wins them, and if your teams win, you get plus money. The Raps, a lot of respect for them in the standings. I'm going to watch. I'm going to cheer. That game's a pass for me. And then I like the Bengals plus 3.5 to at least keep it close in Tennessee.
All right. Remember, we want to hear from you. Your picks, your pans, your comments, your questions. Questions at theparley.com is how you do it on email. You can tweet at either one of us. I'm at Jorey Middle, and Jorey is spelled Jorey. It's always fun having a name like that. Harley's simple, a little more simple, at Sharp Edge Picks. And if you're on social media anywhere, use the hashtag ParleySBS. Next week, speaking of the namesake, we're going to talk about parlays, spelled P-A-R-L-A-Y-S. And we're also going to talk about how to manage your money, bankroll management, one of many areas that Harley is an expert. So hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to put a phrase that I used to use on my old radio show. And that is, on the way out, we always say, good luck. May all your picks be winners. We'll talk to you next week on the Parleh Sports Betting Show with Jorey and Harley on Canada's sports betting network, The Parleh.